This is a fireside chat, and it's called How to Eliminate the Forces That Make It Harder, More Complicated, or Downright Impossible to Get Things Done. The featured speaker is one of my favorite authors, Robert Sutton, author of The Friction Project, How Smart Leaders Make the Right Things Easier and the Wrong Things Harder. He's Professor Emeritus at Stanford University, down the street. He's written more than 200 academic and practical articles. He's a New York Times bestselling author of 8 books. Co-founder of the Stanford School, Stanford Technology Ventures Program, Center for Work, Technology, and Organization. And if you stick around, we're having a reception after this with an open bar and food and many copies of the book that we're talking about today. He'll be around to meet you as well right after this session here. So interviewing him will be someone you've met already, From Day One's co-founder and chief content officer, Steve Koepp. Steve is a veteran journalist. He was the executive editor of Time and Fortune. He was the editorial director of Time's book division. So please join me in welcoming these two to the stage. And thanks again for being here today.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you all.
Good to see you.
I've been talking about Bob all day, and he really is here. So this is a big moment here. Thank you, Bob, for being here. Congratulations on your latest book. As Harvard professor Amy Edmondson, there's 1,000 gems in here about what causes things not to happen in an organization and what actually good friction can be. So that's a new concept to me. But so to get you started, Bob, welcome. We think of Stanford, at least I do as an outsider, as this hub of dynamism and everything clicks. And yet you had experiences there that, maybe for a good thing, prompted you to write this book. And so,
well, those aren't the only bad experiences we had, but yes. So the first, since they're giving away the book, so you don't have to buy it. So the first 2 paragraphs of the book are about a 1,266-word email that was sent to all 2,000 Stanford faculty members with a 7,500-word attachment that invited us to spend a Saturday on Zoom brainstorming about the new sustainability school. And I thought that was sort of malpractice for a senior executive, because if you just do the math, that really was a waste of time. And I, being the obnoxious academic I am, I immediately edited it and kind of got it down to 500 words and sent it back to another administrator and said, at least a little editing might be in order. But that was not the only thing that got us started on the book. In addition, my buddy, co-author, Huggy Rao, and I wrote a book called Scaling Up Excellence about a decade ago. And maybe this applies to some of you. When we worked on our scaling book, there were all these companies that wanted to get bigger, scale, baby, scale. Google would be one that we were involved with early. Facebook, Salesforce, well, they all got real big, and it's real hard to get things done in all 3 of them, and many other large organizations. So that's what got us interested in the topic.
So one of the things that puzzled me at first was like, why is it called the Friction Project? And then when I read it, I realized, but if you could contrast it a little bit to your other sort of famous bestseller called The No Asshole Project. I've never said that on stage.
The No Asshole Rule.
Yeah. Rule.
Sorry, it's all right.
Sorry. But how are they different? I mean, you had a really different approach to these two.
Well, so the No Asshole Rule, so I wrote, I've actually never been asked this question. I wrote the No Asshole Rule while my obnoxious other co-author, Jeff Pfeffer, and I were working on a very long book on evidence-based management that was probably 110,000 words long. And I would just kind of work on it on the side. And so the No Asshole Rule is my shortest book. It has no endnotes. And you know those things at the end, like Amy Edmondson says what a great book this book is, and Adam Grant and everything. Nobody would blurb the No Asshole Rule because of the dirty title. So it has no blurbs either, and it's sold almost 1 million copies, and more than all my other books combined. And that book I wrote in about 4 or 5 months.
Wow.
But it was it's just not that complicated. You don't even have to read the book to know what it's about, right? The No Asshole Rule, you all know what the rule is. So we just had a dirty title. So this one took 7 years, maybe 8 years. So we did academic research, we did case studies of AstraZeneca and Uber would be some examples. I had a podcast a couple of years. We worked with a lot of companies, Asana would be one of them, to help eliminate friction. And then we just, we're old academics and we know a lot of smart people, and especially have a lot of smart former students. So we spent a lot of time just asking them about the problems we face. Some are executives, some like Sadal Neely, who did endorse the book. She was my course assistant. So we just would talk with smart people.
Well, and it sounds like when you sat people down and asked them, like, what makes it hard to do your job, you kind of opened a vein. Like a lot of dark humor came out. And
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? It provided a lot of material, it sounds like.
So Huggy and I, we both do, because this is one of the ways that Stanford makes money and we make money. It's called executive education. You all know about executive education. And so you bring people to Stanford, and between 30 and 80 executives, and you teach them. And Huggy and I, we would ask, what's driving you crazy? What stupid things your company does? And some of the stuff we'd get is that I work in a frustration factory. You've probably heard that. Maybe my favorite one was a woman, I better not say the name of the company. She said, I'm swimming in a sea of shit and they still expect me to show initiative. So we'd start with the therapy, but there was this journey because you sort of have to let audiences vent. And then we started thinking about solutions a little bit. But yes, we've got all sorts of collections of phrases, many of which I'm sure you can contribute to, since we all face those challenges.
Now, what you do in the book is you differentiate between bad friction, which they were, going off on, and there can also be good friction. So can you just give some examples of the difference?
Well, so we started the book, just two things. When we started the book, really as a cynical, it was just moaning and bitching and complaining, honestly. That's how we started. And then there's two bits of good news. One is we realized there's actually something that companies do. So the book is, I would say, 50 or 60% solutions of some kind. Because just complaining is nice, but it's nice to actually figure out how to fix the stuff. And one of the biggest surprises was how many things in life should be difficult or impossible. Let's start impossible. Since I have been teaching at Stanford, I guess, for 40 years. And one of our most famous former students is Elizabeth Holmes, who I don't think she's in jail yet, but she will be soon. And she's the Dropout, if you saw the series, Hulu or something. So Elizabeth Holmes, she dropped out. And then she also, if you read Bad Blood and the various books about it, there was one point where, with help from General Mattis, Mad Dog Mattis, pushed to have her blood testing device, which didn't work and didn't have FDA approval on U.S. Army helicopters. And she lost because there's this thing called FDA approval. So I would compare that. So that's good.
And there was a particular soldier officer who stuck up.
There was a lieutenant colonel who
stood up to General Mattis. Yes.
Yeah, who stood up to. But I would do the contrast of going through it. So we have two other students who are mentioned in the book, but not in this context: Greta Meyer and Amanda Calabrese, who did graduate from Stanford. And they worked the whole time they were undergraduates. I think they're athletes. They took every class I can think of that's on entrepreneurship. They started a company called Sequel. Sequel is reinventing the modern tampon, and talk about a big market. And they graduated and they just got FDA approval and you can buy it. So to me, that's an example of good friction. Yeah. And they've sort of done it the right way. Other things that should be difficult, we have long lists in the book, but the general guideline is anything that you need to stop and think and not rush and be stupid, you should slow down and think. And this comes from Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in economics. He has this notion, when you're in a cognitive minefield and things are all screwed up, maybe you should stop and figure out what's going on. The analogy we use is sort of like a race car. You don't go pedal to the metal the whole time. You slow down on the curves. You come in for a pit stop. And there's a lot of evidence that the best leaders know when to stop and when to go. Probably everybody in this room knows this. And another thing I really would drill down on, since it's something that I've studied a fair amount, and there's a huge academic research on creativity. Creativity, and since a lot of you I know from the list work in organizations where creativity is part of what people do. Yes, it's good to make routine processes as friction-free as possible, but creativity is a fundamentally inefficient process. It's about failure, it's about conflict, It's about dead end, it's about frustration, and that's if you're doing it right. So one of the people who's one of our buddies who we've been talking to for years is Ed Catmull, who ran Pixar for 30-something years. And when you talk to Ed about efficiency in creativity, he just glazes over and gets confused. And he said, well, when I was at Pixar, we would just do it over and over and over again until it was good enough for us.
Yeah.
And I hope people who are building airlines at Boeing are doing this, for example. But anyway,
you said we couldn't talk about Boeing because you hadn't thoroughly researched the
I told them
latest.
not to ask me about Boeing, and then I lost control.
But there will be a whole book. You'll probably write a whole book about it. That's interesting that you had mentioned Pixar, and it's in the book because like some things, like I think it was Toy Story 4. I think people they did it quickly. They didn't like it. They redid the whole thing, and it came out great.
Well, Toy Story 2 was originally Disney wanted them to make it one of those straight made for TV movies. Because they weren't owned by Disney yet, but Disney was the main distributor, and they actually scrapped it about halfway through and started over again. And Pixar and I love the old Pixar movies and everything. They're also a sign, and I don't know what's going on there since Ed Catmull retired about 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know what's happening, but they seem to be stalling out, and at least every creative organization I've ever been part of, it's hard to keep going. So I don't know what's going on.
And the Marvel comic universe seems to be a great example of going too fast. The last few pictures have been not so great. So in the book, and doing all the research and talking to all these people, you created a kind of like taxonomy of destructive traps. Oblivious leaders, addition sickness, broken connections, jargon monoxide, and fast and frenzied. I like the first one, which you called power poisoning. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So power poisoning. So one of the things that academics have studied in just ad nauseum is the effect of power. In fact, just today, a review by a bunch of academics came out of hundreds of studies to try to figure out, so what's the cause of sexism in organizations, which is not an easy thing to find, but their hypothesis is one thing that is pretty consistent is just there tends to be power differences between men and women, and that explains a lot of it. So there's a lot of evidence that power does bad things to our minds as human beings. And one of the things, two elements of power poisoning. One is that when people are powerful, very often they have what some academics call an absence of inconvenience. They don't have to do the things that the little people do, so they don't know how hard it is to use their product or service. And then there's a guy named Dr. Keltner at Berkeley who's been studying this for about 30 years. He does all these things where he makes people feel powerful. Sometimes he'll just tell them that they're the boss. Sometimes that's just enough. Like, you're the boss, you're evaluating the work, and then you two are the worker bees. And when people get in positions of power, they focus more on their own needs, they focus less on the needs of others, and they act like the rules don't apply to them. So I don't even think this is in the book. My favorite study Docker did was the cookie study, where he appoints a boss and then 2 worker bees, and he brings out a plate of 5 cookies. And the people who were in positions of power, they would take the 4th cookie, because we know not to take the last cookie, but there's sort of an extra cookie that's in play. So, so when it comes to friction, one of the things that happen, and we started with this with my vice provost, is very often senior executives and other people who feel powerful are oblivious to their cone of friction, to the effect of starting initiatives, to the emails they send, to the meetings that they start. And that's, I mean, there are a lot of things that cause friction in organization, but one is oblivious senior leaders is one of the things that we go after. And I'm not saying they're all oblivious. There are things they can do to overcome it, but it's a risk that you have being in power.
In the book, you acknowledge that you're not you and your co-author, Huggy, we're not the first people to think of like inefficiency, right?
No. I think I've written no original books.
And there's some like classic ones, right? They're about human tendency to do things like, if you're in a crisis situation, add more people to the committee or put more people on the job. But that doesn't really. Tell us about that.
This idea, and probably many of you in the firms you're from, looking at the list, you know the idea that when a project is late, or when somebody wants to get a raise, these are the 2 times they want to hire more people. And a famous book called The Mythical Man Month by Fred Brooks. Fred Brooks ran the mainframe project, the IBM mainframe project, and then he ran the software project. And his law is when you add more people to a late project, it gets later because you have to onboard them, and then you have more people to coordinate. So that's one of the problems. And one thing we do go after, and I don't know whether Google's here or not, I'll probably get in trouble, but two organizations that I know well, both Stanford and Google, one reason that it's hard to get things done in both places is they have incentive systems where, and Google's trying to change theirs, and maybe even Stanford, we'll see, where the more people work for you, the more you get paid. So you folks in HR, you might want to look at your incentives and see if you have that. And yes, sometimes it is harder to manage a bigger group. And yes, sometimes people need more people. But you also end up with fiefdoms where, well, let's just say at Stanford, we sure have a lot of lawyers. And I know the head lawyer, Debbie Zumwalt, my wife is also a lawyer. I've known Debbie for almost 40 years. Boy, the percentage of lawyers since I've been at Stanford has increased by about 700%, and the percentage of faculty by about 25%. And I bet you Debbie's pay has gone up too.
Now, if people in our audience and readers of the book want to be friction fixers,
yes.
How do they decide? You have a little bit, you call it friction forensics. How do they decide whether something should be fast or slow or?
Well, so the fast or slow, I mean, to me, there's a whole bunch of differences, but the main two things I would talk about is kind of whether you know what you're doing or not. This is the basic idea of Danny Kahneman's. When everything's working, you know the most efficient way to do it, then you want to put the pedal to the metal. So that's one of the things that I would look for. The other thing, and this is a Jeff Bezos thing, is whether or not a decision is reversible. So selling your company probably is not a reversible decision. So that's something that I would think about more carefully. And then another thing where you got to be careful of having too much efficiency. And it's interesting, we're meeting in person. I'm still getting used to meeting in person again. It actually turns out that if you want to create deep, caring, efficient teams, it doesn't. There's flash teams, and some of you probably work in temporary teams. You don't really know people, but the evidence is that the best teams, whether they're starting companies, developing products, putting on Broadway plays, that they work together a lot and develop prior joint experience. That's why so many great Silicon Valley companies were founded by people who worked together when they were students. Hewlett and Packard, Larry and Sergey, the Intuit folks. The Instagram folks, I already mentioned Amanda and Greta. People who work together as students very often or work together in other companies are often the ones who are most effective at starting their organizations.
Now, we wouldn't want to wrap without having an inspiring story of some people who took on inefficiency and friction and succeeded. And so tell us about the Michigan project for the application first, or the gross one, getting rid of stupid stuff, I think was the other one.
Well, so we will end on time. We've only got 2.5 minutes, and you're close to free. So I'll tell each one in a minute. So those of us who know we go visit the doctor in the United States, and instead of looking at us, they look at the screen, electronic health records. So the chief quality officer at Hawaii Pacific, it's the biggest healthcare system in Hawaii, she did something called the Get Rid of Stupid Stuff campaign, where she had nurses, doctors, and so forth make suggestions about how to get rid of some of the steps. And just as an example, it used to be that if you changed the diaper on a baby, you'd have to do 3 clicks. Now it's 1. So you do the math, that really cuts it down. So that's one example. And that was in the New England Journal of Medicine, getting rid of stupid stuff. And my other one, which is my absolute favorite one, is because people say you can't fix government. This is an example of actually fixing government. In the state of Michigan, there is a benefits form that's filled out by 2.5 million people a year, things to get food, health insurance, money for your family. And it used to be, until 2018, that the form was, it had 1,000 questions, it was 42 pages long. One question was, when was your child conceived? Okay, that's just an example. And this amazing new organization, nonprofit called Civility, What they did was they worked with government officials. They worked with activist groups. They worked with frontline staffers, and they all agreed, instead of having civil servants resist what they were doing, they all agreed it was a bad idea. And to make a long story short, the new form is 80% shorter, 20% where people are filling it out, there's fewer errors, there's fewer visits to the field offices because people don't need as much help. And so this is an example that even in government, it can happen. And right now, since I have 36 seconds left, we're doing a case study of friction fixing at the California DMV, which is actually making a lot of progress. Wow. No, we're not doing it. They are. They are. So the real ID that we have to do in California, they've made it so you have to get a wet signature. They've made it so it used to be 28 minutes for the average person at the window. Now it's 8 minutes. So they're making progress.
Wow.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's amazing. The DMV.
They are.
Everyone has DMV trauma here.
Yeah, me too. But they're getting better.
All right, well, Bob, our time is up, and I want, if you would please stay, I'll do my closing remarks, and you'll be astonished.
I'd be honored.
You'll be astonished at how efficient I am. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. Bob will be signing books, and you'll get a complimentary copy afterwards. I think he promises to put no profane inscriptions into them, right?
Unless requested.
Unless requested. Okay, there you go. The other announcement I wanted to make is go to the registration desk. You can finish filling out your crossword puzzles, and you'll find out whether you won the headphones or the backpack. And finally, the final announcement is that the bar is open. We'd love to meet you out in the room with all the refreshments. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you all. All right.